Okay, now we're going to look at chapter 2, William in Power, Securing the Nation. So, in this chapter, we're going to look at how William gains control over England. We're going to look at Anglo-Saxons that didn't like the idea of William being in charge and rebelled against him, and how well or not that went. We're going to look at legacy of resistance, which kind of means what happens afterwards. In this case, it's the harrying of the North. And then finally, we're going to look at the revolt of the Earls. Now, that means, of course, the Norman Earls, which is different for William, having to deal with a revolt from his own. Remember, there are three types of question that you're going to be asked about, possibly, in the exam. The first is a describe one feature of question. So it's ID, identify a feature, describe it. Explain for 12 marks is a Peel times 3 questions. So it's 3 Peel paragraphs. And then finally, the 16 marker, which is really a 20 marker because you've got extra marks for spelling and grammar, and that's ISOC. Introduction, it's like a plan. You sum up exactly what you're going to say. Support, use the first bullet point to support the statement. Oppose, use the second bullet point to oppose it. Choose, add another bullet point, either one that supports or one that opposes the statement. And then conclusion is where you bring it all together. You decide whether you agree or not, and you will explain to me why your argument is stronger than the other side. Also remember, use the resources in the links to help you revise this chapter. There are A3 revision sheets that go with this PowerPoint. There's a revision checklist that you can tick off as you go through. A timeline of events that's very useful. Anglo-Saxon and Norman quizzes, flashcards, all kinds of things, really. If you're watching this on YouTube, then the links will be below. Otherwise, if you're on Instagram, look for Pilton_history_department and you'll find them there. Alternatively, that QR code right there will take you to Linktree, where you can access all of the resources. Okay, let's get on with it. First thing, establishing control, the submission of the Earls in 1066. Now, this is a strange one because you may think that the Earls would want to fight against William to hold on to what they've got, but they don't. They submit to him. They surrender to him. And what you need to do is to provide reasons why. This hasn't come up really before, so it could be a good bet. Reasons why they submitted to him, basically, is the fact that most of the best Saxon soldiers were dead, so there's no one left to fight. William had a strong army, so it would be very difficult to beat him. William controlled the treasury in Winchester, which meant that he had lots and lots of money to pay for more warriors if he needed to continue fighting. The Earls themselves were worried. They didn't want any more fighting because they knew that their towns were being attacked and destroyed. They wanted to stop this. Edgar Atheling was too weak. He's got a claim to the throne, but he hasn't got any real support. And then William offered peace. He promised the Earls they could keep their land and their titles if they submitted. So it kind of made it not worth the gamble. Elsewhere on this page, you've got some work that talks about the Earls' advantages, reasons why maybe they didn't have to submit. The fact that William only controls a small amount of Britain. Edwin and Morcar are still in control of more of Britain than he is, so they could have fought on. William's army itself was nowhere near as big as a third that you could gather together, the Anglo-Saxon soldiers, but of course, as we know, a lot of the best soldiers had already been killed. Rewarding followers. So what does William do? We've got to know how William rewards his own followers, not his own followers, as it says there, and also how he tried to win loyalty from the Saxon Earls. Firstly, Anglo-Saxons. He wanted a trouble-free takeover, so he allowed Edwin and Morcar to keep their earldoms, and he also let the Archbishop, Stigand, and another guy, Eldred, keep their positions. He promised that Edwin could marry his daughter, so he's kind of trying to bribe them in a way. Rewarding his own followers, so those people that fought for William, they get rewards. Rich gifts to the Pope and to the church supporters because they were on his side. He introduced a heavy geld tax to raise money to pay the mercenaries, which are the fighters hired from other countries. So he used Anglo-Saxon money to pay his mercenaries. He gave land to family members and advisors, like his brother, Odo, Bishop of Bayeux. He was given all of Kent, And another supporter, Gospatrick, was made the Earl of Northumbria. Even after the submission of the earls, there was a risk that the English would not accept a foreign invader as king. As a result, William decided to win the Anglo-Saxons around by giving them rewards. And you can see there is just a summary of what I've already said. Marcher earldoms. This is another way in which William gains control. Now, this was a question back in 2024, so I'm not sure if it will appear on its own again. One of William's first priorities was to secure the border between England and Wales. Wales had been a threat to England during Edward the Confessor's reign, and so William was keen to defend the border from any potential attacks. He therefore created 3 new earldoms on the Welsh border. These were called the Marcher earldoms, after the Anglo-Saxon word march, meaning border. He put a loyal Norman in charge of each one. If you look at the map, you can see they're spread out along the Welsh border to try and protect against any possible Welsh attacks. He wanted to make this border more secure. He established these Marcher earldoms, and all 3 of these earldoms were given as rewards to people who'd been loyal to William. You can see the earldom of Chester, Shrewsbury, and Hereford. So these are people that are important to William, people that have done a great deal for him. The Marcher earldoms were different to the other earldoms. They were much smaller, which made them easier to control because they were expecting trouble from Wales. The Marcher earls had special rights that usually only the king had. They could create towns, they could establish churches, they could build castles. The Marcher earls had full control of the legal system in their earldom. The Marcher earls did not have to pay tax, and the Marcher earls, as I said, were free to build castles without applying to the king. All of these privileges that none of the other earls have. These features meant the kings and earls could control the border areas and quickly put down any unrest. The special rights also attracted people from Normandy to come and settle there, colonisation. So he was also doing it to make it more attractive to people in Normandy so he could start filling England with Normans. Castles, he built around 500 of these, and the reason was to control an area. That castle there is a Motte and Bailey castle. They were built very quickly. They were built out of wood. Obviously, William's not daft. He realises they can be burnt down. He just needs somewhere safe to get into while there are people around him who are hostile. He's going to replace them with stone in time. They were built in places like near rivers, near mountain passes, overlooking villages. The Marcher earls built castles all along the English-Welsh border. They were a base. The local lord used it as a base. They were filled with troops so they could use to defend or attack or subdue. They were a symbol of Norman power and they dominated the area. It's a way of reminding people what's going to happen if they try and revolt against the Normans. Castles were different to the Anglo-Saxon boroughs. Boroughs were public, castles were private. Castles were smaller and easier to defend. Castles were harder to burn down because they were protected by earthworks. Castles were designed to control people. Boroughs were meant to protect people. So there's one, if you're asked to explain differences between Anglo-Saxon boroughs and Norman castles, this is a good one. Rebellions, really important that we know our rebellions. I've numbered them just to make sure that you can differentiate between them. So the first is the revolt of Edwin and Morcar. William goes back to Normandy in 1067. He takes Edgar with him and Edwin and Morcar and Waltheof. He's kind of showing off, look who I've captured. When he came back in December, Norman control was under threat. Edwin and Morcar fled north and began a rebellion against William. They went north, where they were joined by others, including Edgar, Waltheof, and Gospatrick. William and his forces headed north, building castles as they went. When William took control of Warwick, Edwin and Morcar surrendered. So William pardons Edwin and Morcar, but he keeps them as guests at his court, prisoners basically. Edgar and the other rebels fled to Scotland, creating a new centre of resistance there. So Edgar often comes back from Scotland to support revolts. William's strength would have convinced many that further revolt was useless. Edwin and Morcar may just have been testing William's response. This would explain why they surrendered so quickly. Now, the question is, Why did Edwin and Morcar decide to revolt? Well, they got angry with William, even though they promised to be loyal with him at first. Reason being, William had made their earldoms smaller, which meant they lost power and they lost money. William had gone back on his promise that Edwin could marry his daughter. If Edwin had married her, then he would have been really important, as he would have been, son-in-law to the king. William introduced a heavy geld tax in 1066. He used the money that he raised from taxing the English to benefit people in Normandy. This made earls such as Edwin and Morcar angry. Normans like Odo and William Fitz-Osborne illegally seized Anglo-Saxon land. William did not stop them. So the Normans were stealing land from the earls, and they were angry about it. William's castles were hated. Anglo-Saxon homes were often demolished to make way for them. The second uprising is an uprising in York that began in February of 1069. Edgar Atheling, of course, comes down from Scotland to join the rebels. And one of the major names here is Robert Cummin. After being betrayed by Gospatric in the 1068 rebellion, William chose a new Earl of Northern Northumbria, Robert Cummin. Cummin violently attacked towns and villages as he went north, and a group of angry Northumbrians retaliated by killing him in Durham. So Robert Cummin replaces Gospatric. Gospatric obviously joined in Edwin and Morcar's rebellion, so he forfeits his earldom. So Robert Cummin was violent. His death was pretty horrible. They managed to force him into a house. He was hiding there, and they burnt it down, and they killed him. After that, the rebels went nuts. They attacked the Normans in York. This time they were assisted by Edgar Atheling and his supporters from Scotland, but William dealt with it again. He attacked York with an army, built a new castle, and put an old friend, William Fitz-Osborne, in charge of it. Edgar escaped back to Scotland. So what we can see so far is the fact the Anglo-Saxons will rise up against William, but he puts them down pretty easily. They're not exactly working together. It's not coordinated. They're attacking in one area, not the whole country. Makes it easy for William. Important to mention there that William goes back to carrying out royal ceremonies after he puts down this revolt. It's because he wants people to see him as the real king. Okay, he says that I'm not an invader, I was promised a throne, so now I've taken it, I'm going to do the things that a real king would do, trying to win people over. Third rebellion is an Anglo-Danish attack on York. So Edgar's forces come back again. This time they're joined by King Sweyn of Denmark, and they launch a massive attack on York. 3,000 Normans were killed, and both Norman castles were destroyed, so it's a big rebellion. The Anglo-Danish forces then separated. The Danes went to the swampy fens of Lincolnshire, so they go south, while the Anglo-Saxon rebels scattered and started small revolts all across England. This was almost impossible for William to deal with, since each time he defeated a rebellion, another one broke out somewhere else. So William gets really, really fed up with this. Every time he appears, puts down a rebellion, another one pops up somewhere else. So he's traveling around all the time dealing with them. So he needs to do something to make sure there aren't going to be any more rebellions ever. William's solution was to pay the Danes to go away. Without Danish support, Edgar's Anglo-Saxon force was no match for the Normans. William then began a campaign of destruction called the Harrying of the North. It was intended to punish the North, but also prevent it from being used as a base for future Viking invasions. So he was pretty fed up of the fact that the Vikings and King Sweyn appeared all the time to cause trouble. And the reason they did it was because in the north, Northumbria, there were lots of Danish families, Viking families that would welcome them in, help them, give them supplies. William decides he's going to destroy the whole area so they can never use it as a base again. Next one, Herod the Wake and his rebellion at Ely in 1070 to 71. In 1070, a Danish fleet led by King Sweyn, him again, of Denmark, returned to England. They based themselves on the Isle of Ely, in the middle of the swampy fens. Local knowledge of this dangerous area was crucial, so Sweyn made alliances with several local people. One of these locals was Herod the Wake, a former thane whose land had been given to the Normans, so he was angry about that. He'd been fighting a guerrilla war against the Normans, using his knowledge of the fens to launch surprise attacks. So what he was doing is attacking the Normans and then getting back to the Isle of Ely. It was surrounded by swamp, and the Normans couldn't get near it. They tried, but they were sinking into the fens and drowning, so it was a good place for him to escape to. Herod and the Danes now teamed up to attack Peterborough Abbey. Herod was determined for its treasures to stay out of Norman hands. Unfortunately for Herod, the Danes took Peterborough's treasures and sailed back to Denmark. So that's a bit of a disappointment for poor old Herod. William approached the fens with an army. Herod was now joined by Morcar, and he prepared to defend Ely. So William and the Normans, first of all, try to build a pontoon. They try to build a bridge across to the island. But when they stand on it, it's so heavy they sink into the mud and drown. So William's in a different situation here. He's found someone that doesn't run away when he tries to fight him. And he's found someone that is very, very clever and is able to get some wins and victories over him. Eventually, William and his men find a secret way on to the Isle of Ely. Perhaps they were sold out by local monks, but eventually they got on there. Morcar was caught. He was imprisoned for life. Herod escaped, and no one ever heard from him again. So it's really important to remember there are 4 rebellions that William has to deal with. The revolt of Edwin and Morcar, the uprising in York and Durham against Robert Cumin, the Anglo-Danish revolt, attack on York again, and Herod the Wake. How does he deal with each one? Really important. Little bit more about Herod the Wake there if you want to pause and have a read. Harrying of the North. Well, basically, after the rebellions in the North, William destroys it. A horrendous campaign of violence and destruction. He destroys villages, burns crops, kills animals. They even salt the earth so nothing can grow ever again. Why did he do it? Firstly, revenge for the Normans that were killed in 1069 and his friend Robert Cumin. Also to weaken the north, to make it impossible for anyone to stay there. That way it could never be used as a base for future rebellions, especially the Vikings. They couldn't come over from Denmark to use it anymore because there was no one there to help them. Impacts. Short-term impact was it was a disaster zone, no food, no shelter, people starved or froze to death. 100,000 people died and many people left the region. Long-term impact, the area was ruined for many years. 20 years later, in the Domesday Book, 60% of Yorkshire was classed as wasteland. There were thousands fewer people living there than there had been in 1066. Even by medieval standards, the level of violence had been horrific. Lots of people criticised William, including the Pope. So William spent a lot of the rest of his life trying to make amends to the church. Nonetheless, the harrying achieved what he wanted it to. It stopped further rebellions in the north. When the Vikings invaded again in 1070, they based themselves further south, in the Fens, rather than Northumbria. The harrying was a turning point. From this point on, William decided to replace the Anglo-Saxon aristocracy rather than try to win them over. So this is a big turning point. He's decided now he will remove all the Anglo-Saxons and replace them with Normans. He's not going to try and win them over anymore. You need a good knowledge of why William destroyed the North. What did he get out of it? What could never happen again in the North? And what were the consequences of it, short and long term? What happened as a result, straight away and over time? Changes in land ownership. You've got to know what was done to take land away from the Anglo-Saxons now that he's decided he's going to do it. I've written Anglo-Saxons, I'll change that later. Between 1066 and 1087, William replaced the Anglo-Saxon landowners with Normans. The rebellion showed he could not trust them. By 1087, less than 5% of the land was held by Anglo-Saxon aristocrats. Only 2 of England's tenants-in-chief were Anglo-Saxons. How did Anglo-Saxons lose their land? Forfeit. Landowners simply lost their land as a punishment. William took it and gave it to the Normans instead, like Morcar, Edwin, and Harold. New earldoms. William made new earldoms, the Marcher earldoms, and gave them to his followers. They were created to defend trouble spots. Land grabs. This was illegal. Normans either seized land or took it through corrupt dealings, which left Anglo-Saxons with less than before. Norman sheriffs were known for doing this. After 1071, William combined blocks of territory to form large blocks, rather than earls having pieces of land all around the country, so they could put them together to threaten him. If he kept it in one place, he knows exactly where they are and how to deal with them. So it's really important to be able to compare how Edward and the Anglo-Saxons let people have land and how William and the Normans did it. William has the greater control over land and people. The problem Edward has with the Godwins is a really good example to use. This can never happen to William. Let's find out why. Anglo-Saxons, there were two types of landholding. Either book land, landowners had a document given to them by their lord that showed they had the right to this land and they could pass it on, they owned it. Leases, land was loaned for a set amount of time in exchange for money. What William does is change things around. He says he owns all the land. People were only borrowing it from the king. Anglo-Saxons had to pay William for the right to keep using their land. Normans did not. If a landowner died without an heir, the land went back to William. Heirs who inherited land had to pay a tax to William. He enforced the rules strictly. So if someone dies and wants to pass the land on to their son, they've got to pay a big tax to William. William loves money. By the time William's reign ended, only 5% of England's land was held by Anglo-Saxons. All landowners now depended much more on William, which meant they were less likely to rebel against him. Consequently, William's changes to land ownership helped him increase his control. If you risked rebelling against William, you lost your land, so you had to think it through before you did it. It was a real deterrent. Important, we need to know that William has total control over his tenants-in-chief, something Edward never really had, because he can take their land if they didn't behave. In the same way, the tenants-in-chief had total control over the thanes to make sure they did as they were told. William's tenants-in-chief, the new lords, now had power over the thanes. They could reallocate land when a thane died. They could replace thanes who acted against them. Thanes had to be obedient vassals, like servants, and follow their lord. Peasants' lives became harder, as the new tenants-in-chief wanted to get more money from their land. Ceorls, free peasants, became rarer. All of these land changes made William's power stronger and resistance less likely. You may well get a question that asks you why William was so powerful or how he kept hold of power. The answer is below. How does he keep hold of power? His military strength, the fact that he sees himself as a legitimate successor. He stresses that Edward promised him the throne and he's the rightful king. Oath-taking, he holds great ceremonies where every landowner comes and swears loyalty to him. If they break it, they lose their land. Royal ceremonies, he's anointed with sacred oil. He promises to keep Edward's laws. He begins a tradition of being seen wearing his crown 3 times a year, so everyone sees that this guy is the real king. Journeys around England, he travels around showing himself to people, meeting important families, being visible, showing how powerful he is, make sure they stay loyal. Owning the land, he owns everything. He can punish people by taking it away. He has total control. And coinage and writs. His official royal seal was put on coins and documents. You could only use the king's coins. He could control the money. Revolt of the Earls. Well, there was another revolt in 1075, but this time it's different. It involves Normans rebelling against William and Anglo-Saxons defending him. You must know that this is a different type of revolt against William because it's the first time when Normans rebel against him. So who's involved? Ralph de Gale, Norman, Earl of East Anglia. Roger de Brutal, Norman, Earl of Hereford. Waltheof, Saxon, Earl of Northumbria. Why did they revolt? Well, Ralph, it's about loss of power and wealth. When he took over from his father, he got less land. It was made smaller than his father, so he's got less power, less money, and he's grumpy about it. Same for Roger. William had introduced his own sheriffs into the Marcher earldoms, so he made sure that Roger lost power. Yeah, you're still the earl, but you're losing authority. It's the sheriffs that report to William, and he's a bit disgruntled about that. Waltheof, we don't know really why he got involved, but it looks as if they were going to rule the whole country between them, so it's all about power, I guess. The leader was Ralph de Gale. He plotted with Roger de Brutal and Waltheof to overthrow William and split the country between them. Reasons for the revolt, like we said, loss of land, loss of privileges, loss of power. William had been in Normandy since 1073, leaving Lanfranc in charge. His absence gave the conspirators an ideal opportunity to rebel. So they thought they could rebel and Lanfranc wouldn't be able to deal with it. Thing is, Lanfranc's very, very good at organising things and he gets things done, so he's no pushover. Ralph and Roger first discussed their plans with Waltheof at the wedding feast of Ralph and Emma, Roger's sister. Lots of important earls and bishops were there. Waltheof was the last surviving Anglo-Saxon earl and had good contacts with King Sweyn of Denmark. The men expected Danish support for their plan. So the reason they included Waltheof was the fact that he was friends with King Sweyn, and we all know that King Sweyn likes a good visit to England, don't we? So they know that they can use him to get Sweyn to help the invasion. What went wrong? Most Anglo-Saxons supported William. They would not help the rebellion. Waltheof changes his mind and tells Archbishop Lanfranc what was going on. Lanfranc wrote to Roger trying to convince him not to revolt. He threatened to excommunicate him, which is cut him off from the church. Really serious in medieval times. It means you can't go to heaven. Lanfranc organised countermeasures. Norman and Anglo-Saxons worked together to prevent Roger and Ralph from breaking out of their earldom. So the Anglo-Saxons, along with Lanfranc and the Normans, put together little armies to block these men from escaping from their own earldom, so they couldn't even start the rebellion. By the time the Danish fleet finally arrived, William was back. The Danish leaders dared not fight him. They simply raided the east coast, like they do, and went home. So he arrived too late to do anything. As soon as they saw William was there, they were like, nope, not risking it. The defeat of the revolt, Ralph escapes to Brittany while his wife Emma held out in the Norwich castle. Roger was imprisoned for life, like Morcar, and Waltheof fled abroad. He came home thinking he'd been forgiven because he's the one that sort of told Lanfranc about it, but he was executed. Obviously, William's really lost his patience with Anglo-Saxon earls. William tries to attack Ralph's castle in Brittany, but he's got to retreat because there's so much resistance. Significance of the revolt. Why was it so important? Well, it's so important because it shows William he's got to be careful of his own earls. They resent his power. They're angry at losing some of their own power and money. From this point on, rebellion against William actually came from Normans, not Anglo-Saxons. The Danish threat seems to have shaken William. When there was another Danish invasion threat, he went to extreme measures to boost England's defences. Anglo-Saxons helped to stop the revolt. It suggests that some Anglo-Saxons now supported William. However, the execution of Waltheof shows that William continued to come down hard on Anglo-Saxon rebels. Summary then. Anglo-Saxon earls submitted to William in 1066. William rewarded supporters and followers with land and money. He built castles, he created the Marcher earldoms to control England. There were several rebellions, mainly due to resentment over land. The revolt by Edwin and Morcar was defeated quickly. Rebellions in the north and the east were serious because Danish support was involved. William used brutal tactics like the harrying of the north to end Anglo-Saxon rebellions. After the rebellions, William changed ownership to make thanes more dependent on their new Norman lords. The rebellions were really important because he changes land ownership to make sure he can keep a closer eye on the Saxons. William's skill and strength helped him maintain power. The revolt of the earls in 1075 was a serious threat because it involved three powerful earls and a large Danish force, but it failed due to Anglo-Saxon support for William. Now remember, the materials for this chapter are in various places. You can get them on the Instagram or you can get them on the link tree. Also, I have posted them below so you can get your flashcards, you can get your revision timeline, which tells the story in order, and the checklist that's really important. Can you tick off that checklist? If you can, it means you're ready for chapter 2. Okay, I'll see you later.